Evolutionary Hardcore 2.0, episode number 7. Lucky 7. Steve and the Mobster joining me. How's it going, buddy?
All good. Finished training, ready to hit up a podcast.
We are ready. Love you guys so much for joining us. And today we're going to talk about Trenbolone and Orals to bulk complements of Euro Pharmacies, which is a steroid brand out there. And we'll listen. Tren is a tremendous steroid, and we're going to talk about how to stack it with an oral. One of my favorite stacks of all time. In fact, the stacks that I've always hit PRs with mass and strength, have been with Tren plus an oral. So this, if you've never tried it before, if you never tried Tren before, even if you've tried Tren before, we're going to show you some cycles that are really going to be appealing to you. So let's first talk about bulking. And, let's talk about what bulking is a little bit and kind of get into it. So whenever I hear the word bulking, it usually means, some big dude in the gym who's just like on a perma bulk. Some dude at the gym who he eats whatever he wants. Oh, I'm in the mood for pizza tonight. I'm just going to order pizza. I'm in the mood for fast food. I'm going to get some fast food. They eat tons of food. They go to the gym, they lift heavy weights, and they go home. And it works for them. They're definitely bulky. They're definitely massive. But to me, have you ever seen a dude, like look at Mobster's pictures. Mobster, he's a big dude, but he doesn't look fat. He doesn't look obese. He's still lean versus other strength trainers who are lifting the same amount as him, even though he weighs a lot because he has so much muscle in his frame. So there's a difference between bulking to get fat and bulking to actually be massive and have a lot of muscle mass. It's not the same thing at all. So I have a lot of respect when I see a person who eats on point and they're big and they're muscular and they're strong, but they're also lean at the same time. That's someone I respect. I don't respect people who walk around the gym with big bellies and they have, a belt and their fucking belly fat's hanging over their belt and they're strong, And, okay, I mean, you're big, and you're strong, but you're also fat at the same time. So to me, that's not proper. That's not what I consider bulking. I just consider that fat. So when someone says, yeah, dude, I'm bulking, and you look at them and they got like a big belly hanging over their belt when they're lifting at the gym, so that's something I personally respect, But look, some people like that, and I'm not gonna say that that's wrong. But to me, that's not the definition of bulking. I think bulking also should be steady over time. Think about it. You're only let's say you put 2 pounds of muscle a year on your frame. Now, a lot of you listening to this, you're in your 20s. You're listening to this, I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to put 2 pounds on my frame a year. That's nothing, But think about it. Over the course of 20 years, from when you're 25 to 45, in that 20-year span, you'll put on 40 pounds. That's a lot of muscle. Go to the supermarket and look at a 1 pound steak. Look at a New York strip. It's about a pound, right? Or a sirloin. It's about a pound. Look how big that is. That's a huge steak. Now imagine 40 of those steaks stacked up. Now you know what I'm talking about when it comes to how much muscle 40 pounds is. So if you can just put on and properly bulk 2 pounds a year on average, that's a big, big deal. So basically my point is, you can use steroids to help you add more muscle. The reason we use steroids in the first place is to increase protein synthesis and help our bodies recover from our workouts about half the time. I don't mean like you're going to recover from an injury in half the time. I'm talking about, in layman's terms, you're going to get sore half as long when you're on steroids than you would off of steroids. That's pretty much what gives steroids the advantage in our body. It gives us the better ability to better synthesize the protein in our muscles to better put on muscle mass and easier than we could without steroids. So it's completely normal. So you cycle steroids, you bulk with them, then you come off and you lose a little bit back. It's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back thing. And over the course of time, you will put on the muscle mass over time if you're lifting consistently and you're eating good. So to me, that's my definition of bulking. That's the way I teach it. So Mobster, tell us your opinion on bulking. And when you hear that word bulking, what does it mean to you? You work with a lot of big guys.
Yeah. One of the things that I've discussed in previous podcasts, Steve, is this whole idea of dirty bulking versus lean bulking. And what we're going to get into a little bit today, when we're going to talk about specific products that Euro Pharmacies provides, is the difference perhaps, I think on this particular podcast, is the distance between wet bulking and dry bulking. What do I mean by that, guys? There are some products, which we'll discuss, which you can hold a little bit of water, and that's going to hide. If you're ripped when you start doing a bulk, I don't expect you to be as ripped at the end of a bulk as you would, for example, a cutting cycle. And especially so if, for example, Steve, you used a quote unquote wet product where a certain amount of water retention is involved versus a dry product where you tend to put on just lean muscle, especially in the example that Steve gave of 1 or 2 pounds. Now, again, like Steve says, and I've actually said this on previous podcasts, Steve, 100%. I've been in this game a long time. And when you calculated out what I weighed age 18, and I actually started age 15, but I kept notes age 18 till now, and you subdivided the years, and you said, how many pounds did you gain? It only worked out between 4 and 6 pounds, Steve. I think the cycle years, once I started, and that was after 22 years of training, I averaged around 6 pounds. And non-cycles, natty, if you like, I averaged 4 pounds, or certainly off-cycle years, 4 pounds. And for again, you guys listening, especially you younger guys listening, will be going 4 pounds, 6 pounds. Doesn't seem like that much. 43 years, guys. So I think one calculation I looked at, I actually think I need to update it, was 125 pounds in those 43 years. That is a shit. That's like another person, Steve. That's like a medium-sized woman. I've gained that much body weight. So yeah, for me, again, I think it's the difference. In general terms, Steve, the difference between certainly the difference between getting cut, which is essentially removing as much body fat as you possibly can to look lean and ripped, that's a cutting cycle. And certainly you should be leaner at the end of a cutting cycle than you started out with. A bulking cycle to me is that little magical combination of a little bit of water, a little bit of fat, but mostly about 80% of your gain should be lean muscle tissue. It doesn't have to be all lean muscle tissue like it might be on certain dry products, but it has to be mostly muscle tissue. And again, the trick is, if you like, guys, isn't just to bulk up if your cycle finishes and you lose it all, it's kind of adding weight. Otherwise, all you're just doing is going up and down, up and down, up and down. So for me, I'm like Steve. The magical fairy godmother version of this story is that she waves her wand and we gain 20 pounds. The reality is I would like to see you guys maybe 6, 7, 8 pounds on cycle, keeping 3, 4, 5 pounds off cycle. And that's a bulk for me as well. Like Steve said, Mike Mentz had done this with the 24-ounce beef burgers. And he said, if you would, you could slap them on your shoulders, or you could slap them on your arms, and then just look at, perversely crazy as that might seem, and then imagine the silhouette you're going to have with those extra muscles. And old school, new school, modern bodybuilding from the 50s, it's kind of still the same, Steve. It is off-season, new muscle, especially if you're competing in the right places, and then competition time, getting ripped. It's as simple as that. It's that slightly out of season, slightly soft kind of look. And also something else that I've touched on before, Steve, is, in my opinion, and it completely depends where you live in the world, guys, because seasons are different, but cold is easier to bulk because it's nature that you're working with, and that little bit of fat insulates you versus a hot climate, a hot time of year, and needing to be leaner. I wouldn't want to bulk in the summertime as equally as I wouldn't want to diet down, get ripped in the wintertime. It's as simple as that, Steve. Yeah, back to you.
All right. So look, at the end of the day, why do we use a cycle like Trenbolone plus an oral? It's because we don't want to put on just 2, 3 pounds. We want to put on 5, 10, or 12 pounds at a time. And that's, whenever I run Tren, the first week or two, right off the bat, I put on like 6, 7 pounds, and I have no clue how, because I don't get fat on it. It just comes. So that's why we want to use steroids. We want to take things to the next level. We want to put on a shit ton of bulk quickly. So naturally, 1, 2, maybe 3 pounds a year, depending where you're coming from, over the course of 10, 20 years, versus hopping on a steroid and putting 5, 10, 12 pounds quick. And that's why a lot of guys choose to use steroids. And look, in the livestock industry, Trenbolone, which they call Phenaplix, it was intentionally developed to promote androgen and gain muscle mass in cattle. So it allows livestock to grow as much muscle as possible before they are transported to the slaughterhouse. This way, the farmer can make more money. This way, there's more meat on that cow to be sold, because they're trying to make money. They're trying to make a profit. Duh, that's how it works. They're not giving them Tren for them to lose weight. They're giving them Tren to bulk. So Trenbolone, the original Parabolin, was developed for bodybuilding, not for cattle, but for bodybuilding. So it's one of the steroids that are out there, which actually was developed for humans specifically to help us with bodybuilding. So anyone who tells you otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. So we're going to use it to help us bulk. So people who say, oh, Tren, it's a cutter, you can use it to cut, and you can. But just because they want to use it to cut doesn't mean that we have to use it to cut, right? We can use it to bulk up, and it works incredibly well for bulking up. Really the best steroid out there, aside from probably DECA, when it comes to bulking. And I say that because the main difference between Tren and DECA is Tren is going to give you a shit ton more side effects than DECA will. DECA is very mild, okay? I don't care what anybody tells you. DECA is very, very mild versus Tren. Number one. Number two, DECA, your appetite's going to increase on DECA. I mean, you're never going to be satiated on DECA. You're going to be going out. You're going to be wanting to eat 2 meals at that family barbecue. You're going to want to eat 2. If everyone's eating 2 burgers, you're going to be eating 4 burgers. Okay, that's what DECA does. Tren doesn't do that. Tren actually, in a lot of cases, will make you less hungry because of the side effects that it's doing in your body, which we'll get to later in this podcast. But the thing with Tren is it is one of the best steroids, probably the best injectable steroid out there when it comes to basically turning your muscles into sponges. And what I mean by that was when you take Tren, you are going to crave carbs throughout the day, and you're going to have to balance your carbs throughout the day. Tren is not the steroid to use if you do a lot of intermittent fasting. You can do a lot of fasting. It's not the steroid to use because it's very difficult to fast while you're on Tren. All right, because you're going to start getting a lot more side effects if you're not getting carbs in your system. So good, clean carbs on Trenbolone, sweet potatoes, brown rice, raw honey, raw maple syrup, fruit, big one, fruit. I know everyone's scared of fruit for some reason because we've been lied to in bodybuilding for the past 50 years. Everyone's like, oh, can't have fruit. Fruit's crucial on Tren because it also hydrates you. And that's something that's really annoying about Tren versus DECA. On DECA, you don't get like thirsty all day on DECA. You don't wake up in the middle of the night feeling nauseous because you need to drink water. But Tren will do that to you, especially if you live in a warmer climate. You're going to wake up in the middle of the night with sweats. So we'll talk about sides in a minute. But my point is, a lot of these side effects you get from Tren are because of the way it nutrition partitions in the body. It's basically everything you put in your body turns into a sponge, and your muscles absorb it like crazy. So absolutely, Mobster, Tren is a great, great, great bulker. And when you stack it with an oral, even if it's a cutter oral, it's going to be a great bulker. So we're going to talk about, in the next couple segments, we're going to talk about not only orals, that we know are good for bulking. But we're also going to
Yeah.
be talking about orals that are for cutting. You're going to be like, why should I'm going to explain exactly why when we talk about that, why even a cutting oral will work great on Tren for bulking. So Mobster, talk a little bit about the people you've seen who have run Tren. We've seen some amazing transformations over the years on the forums where guys who have gone on Tren 8 weeks have completely changed their physique. I mean, it's incredible. I know with me, after like 3 weeks, I look different in the mirror after on Tren. It's tremendous. It's a tremendous steroid.
I was going to say, Steve, it doesn't really matter what forum you go on. There are if there's a million forums, Steve, then there's 900,000 guys saying something like Tren is the bollocks. I love Tren. Tren is everything. Tren is God. All that kind of stuff. So there's a huge percentage of guys, if they can handle the side effects, that love what Tren does for them, whether it's aggression in the gym, whether it's getting leaner, whether it's bulking up, or whatever else. Now, from my experience, and I've said this on previous podcasts, the side effects was the issue, but purely and simply on its own, and never mind what else the guys were using. My strength buddies would use Tren to get stronger. And what we're looking at here, guys, it's hard to imagine sometimes, especially if you're a Joe just working, starting out, a Joe or a Jane just starting out on the journey and just listening to this kind of podcast to get informed, ready for your cycles in the future. Most of my buddies were 150 kilograms. See, that's 330 pounds. So you're not looking at super lean fellas. And the problem, that's kind of like what bulking's around. You're not being super lean. But the problem with not being super lean on Tren is the sweats, the coughs, and everything, the whole side effects thing. So again, loving what happens in the gym, loving how they felt in the gym, moving those crazy, crazy weights around, but they needed to be leaner. Now, the thing of it here, Steve, of course, especially when we're talking about Tren with another oral, or with an oral, because there's oral versions of Tren as well, of course, is the synergy. And something Steve's used this word in previous podcasts, and it's quite simple. And again, it comes down to individual response as well, of course, but it's this. There are certain combinations that work for most people. Again, Steve said a great injectable Sustendeca, which I've used. And I think that's absolutely one of my favorite injectable bulking cycles ever. And did incredibly well on that and did all the things that I needed to do at the time when I was running those cycles. The same applies to Tren with orals and certain orals. And the reason why we do this podcast is because we looked at the kind of questions you guys asked, and those questions that are about if I could do Tren and an oral and I wanted to bulk up, what would happen? So there's a synergy, and the synergy comes from certain particular drugs. And like I said, individual response. But again, for the most part, the drugs that we're talking about work for the majority of people, and they get strong. And they love that extra edge that certain harsh drugs almost give you. It doesn't have to be specifically aggression, Steve, but it's kind of bordering on the edge of anxiety. And if you manage it really well, it only really goes kind of annoying and a sort of flow to your gym work. And if anything, Steve, for me, I'd love it as if not having used Tren, I would say this is where I would like to see all that kind of pressure, the anxiety, whatever it is that side effects of Tren can give you in the gym, exhaust myself so that I come out. And then, and I've touched on this before, the kind of training that I'll be doing, which we'll get into, the kind of nutrition, like Steve said. And again, that's another one. Using Tren on its own, like Steve said, that food partitioning and a certain sense and feeling that comes from using Tren versus, for example, balancing it out with another oral. And we'll list the orals briefly, but a good example would be D-Bowl, the sense of well-being. The two things together should just about balance each other out, Steve. There's a sort of sense of aggression versus that sense of well-being. You go into the gym, you're smashing the weights, you've bulked up, you're feeling better, and that whole combination. So there's a synergy, guys. That's why certain orals work in combination, the wet stuff, the dry stuff, all those kind of things. It's kind of sometimes very difficult to be 100% specific on this, literally because it's dose dependent. It depends on the condition you was in when you start, the condition you're in when you finish, and you and your receptor infinity and everything else. But we try to be, as best as we possibly can, as generalized in our experience and based on working with clients and listening to forum members and saying, those are the numbers you use. This is where they saw the success. As an example, Steve, I can think of a couple of forum members that have run very similar cycles, and 8 pounds was kind of solid. This is where it came in. and whatever else. There's a thing like Steve said right at the beginning. Can you bulk on Tren? Yes, sir, of course you can. For exactly the reasons that Steve said. That's precisely why that, and I believe there was one other drug they used to give to the cattle. It was precisely why it was created. It was literally getting ready for going to market, getting ready to go to be slaughtered, all the stuff that they'd done up to that point, and then the last few weeks to get that extra. Because literally, guys, the more meat on the bone was more money for the cattle owners, for the butchers, for the slaughterhouse, for everybody. It's more cash, either to pay or to be paid. It's as simple as that. So you go. If it works for bulking up cattle, then it's going to work for you. We do have to tweak the doses, of course. Quite perversely, we're using more dosage of Tren in humans than they are in a calf. But Steve, that's crazy. But again, it does work. And again, it's diet dependent as well, of course, guys. So we're getting to all of that in a moment. Back to you, Steve.
So let's get into different orals that you can stack with Trenbolone. So, I'm going to start out with talking about Tren with Anavar, because I know Mobster has a lot of experience with Dynabol, and I would definitely want him to talk about Dynabol with Tren. But what I mentioned in the prior segment about people who will say, "Oh my gosh, Anavar, you can't bulk on Anavar." Well, if you run Anavar by itself, I would agree with that. It's definitely not a bulker. It's definitely not a bulker on its own. And it's definitely not a bulker with some other steroid stack. But with Tren, it's one of my favorite bulkers. Because here's why. Trenbolone is an extremely androgenic steroid. Okay? It's an extremely anabolic steroid. So when you use Tren, a good quality Tren, like from Euro Pharmacies, which it's going to be the cleanest Tren that's out there, and then you use Anavar from Euro Pharmacies, which is going to be real Anavar, because Euro Pharmacies doesn't sell fake products. Their products are made in a lab, and their products are proper. So in this case, Anavar, you're getting a mild, non-androgenic, and mildly anabolic oral that you can take with the Tren. And the Tren is going to do the dirty work of the androgens and the anabolic effects in the body. And the Anavar is basically just going to be an addition that's not going to cause your side effects to go crazy. So it's a great stack together. And absolutely you can bulk and you can get stronger on it. In fact, the Tren and the Anavar stack was the stack that I used to break personal records, both in weight and in strength. And it worked incredibly well for me, and I love it. So in my case, this is the way I ran. I ran the Tren, about 250 to 300 milligrams a week, okay? And I ran the Anavar between 40 and 50 milligrams a day. And I ran Tren Ace and the Anavar 6 weeks. That's it, just 6 weeks. And during that 6 weeks, man, within the first week, I looked different in the mirror. I looked bigger. In fact, my girlfriend at the time, I had pictures taken. And those of you who've been following me over the years, I posted pictures of some of my cycles and how big I look. She even made the comment. She's like, man, Steve, she's like, you're too big. And she said it with she said it kind of just exaggerate. You're too big. You're too muscular. And it's true. That's what happens when you take this stuff. It just makes you into an absolute beast. And the side effects aren't that bad, because the Anavar is not going to give you the estrogenic side effects. It's not going to give you the water weight. It's not going to give you any of that. And then it's not going to give you those androgenic side effects. It's not going to, destroy your heart health in the process where you feel like shit all day. So it's a really, really good stack together. If you really want to do something like for 6 weeks, try that stack. The Tren Ace, you're using the short ester of Tren. Now, Euro Pharmacies has both. They have the Tren enanthate and they have the Tren acetate. What is the difference between the two? It's the ester. The Tren acetate, you're going to have to inject every other day or every 2.5 days at the most. With the Tren enanthate, you only have to inject it twice a week at most. It's fine. You can even inject it every 4 or 5 days. It's fine doing it that way. So that's the main difference. The Anavar that they sell is legit Anavar. Euro Pharmacies Anavar is legit. Now, Anavar is one of the most faked steroids out there. So you want to make sure you're using legitimate Anavar. So Mobster, jump in on that and talk about D-Bol with Tren. How would you use D-Bol with Tren? Talk about the dosages and the length of cycle.
Right. I'll start by listing the options you have here, guys. And we've obviously double checked to make sure D-Bol, Anavar, Winstrol, Anadrol, halotestin, M1C, Provaronant, and Superdrol. Now, for what I would call true bulking, and what I mean by that is that little bit of soft tissue, a little bit of water, etc., etc. D-Bol would be up there, Anadrol would be up there, and to a lesser degree, Superdrol. In terms of the drier bulking, like Steve just said, and I've done this myself, of course, Anavar and Winstrol. Halotestin for me is more of an aggression enhancing drug, although I never got that from it, but from most people is, and M1C is up there as well. Don't have too much knowledge on that particular one, Steve. Now, specifically, I've run from Euro Pharmacies the D-Bol, the Anavar, and the Anadrol. 100% run them, tried them, used them, and even mentioned it in my logs online. So you can go and check that out, guys, just to see the kind of information I put up and my doses and so on and so forth. I'll concentrate, as Steve suggested, specifically on the Dianabol. Now, Steve and I are both low dose kind of guys in terms of what we would advise and use ourselves. And so if I was using Tren, I would probably look in somewhere between 250 and 300 milligrams a week, guys, not a day, not per dose. And I would keep the D-Bol no higher than 50 milligrams. And because of that, I know how I've responded. And this is one of the things I've said in other podcasts when I've been talking about D-Bol. For me, D-Bol is, I can't think of a time when I haven't gained on cycle 10 pounds. Swear to God, guys. I've run it at lower dosages and gone 6, 7, 8 pounds. I would probably run it slightly higher now, only because I'm an older guy. I've used the drug before and the response, but it's never going to be 50, 60, 70, 80, 100. It's never going to be 120, nothing like that, ever, ever, ever. And the sweet spot, as we've talked about on its own in the past, especially for you new guys, is 30, 40 milligrams. And again, that's per day on that particular one. I said 200 to 300 on the Tren. Now, for me, here's how I think this would go. I think the combination here of Dianabol and Tren together would be 50 milligrams tops, probably actually slightly less because I'm running it with Tren, but 50 milligrams tops on the D-Bol. And again, the combination of that feel-good factor that I touched on earlier on, the pumps that you get on Dianabol, the nitrogen uptake, which happens with most anabolic steroids, of course, Steve, and as Steve said earlier on, that partition effect. Here's what I think would happen with me, Steve. If I gained, let's say, for example, guidance on 50 milligrams a day D-Bol, and I went up 10 pounds, a good part of that's going to be water, but not in combination with the Tren. Because of the food partition that Steve talks about, in a way, what really happens there, Steve, is it kind of forcing food into glycogen into the muscle. So that's another reason why the cattle got bigger when they were being quote unquote fattened up for the market, or really bulked up for the market. That would happen to me too. So what I think would happen is normally you would see me slightly watery, small increment in my blood pressure, gaining 10 pounds. I think I'd actually get, like Steve said, ever so slightly leaner. Certain muscles would pop, certain muscles would be harder. And that's where that Tren D-Bol magic would happen. The only issue for me, Steve, I'd have to be careful with this, is I don't eat massive amounts of food during the daytime. I tend to eat a lot more towards the end of the day. I'd have to, and this occasionally happens with me, Steve, and it's probably something that we've touched on another podcast when we talk about insulin sensitivity, etc., etc. I'd have to be careful, especially post-trading, that I eat in enough that I didn't get that blood sugar drop. And I think that's the only thing I would worry about in regards to Tren, especially at the lower, more sensible doses for me. Now, as I say, specifically, I've used the others. Anadrol was a good one for bulking, and an enormous amount of people. The doses are actually less than is used medically, which is kind of crazy, when most of the time we use a lot more than medical and clinical situations. And Anavar. Anavar's 100% for me, and I've said this in another podcast, Steve, whether it's from EP or how I used it in the past, and I have used the Euro Pharmacies products, I would gain about 5 pounds on Anavar. And the only reason I didn't keep those 5 pounds is because the purpose of the cycle was to give me strength. So I think Tren and Anavar would be an interesting cycle for me, Steve, purely and simply because an enormous amount of users of Tren talk about their strength enhancement. You've got that lean muscular bulk that we're talking about. And I've always responded well to Anavar in terms of gaining strength. Yeah, because I'm not trying to get much bigger, most of my cycles, it's not about me retaining new tissue afterwards, not anymore. But if I was starting out, if I was halfway through my journey, I think a Tren Anavar combination would be very interesting for me, Steve, in terms of strength enhancement, adding lean muscular bulk, and just the sensations of get on it. Because I think I've played around with different combinations as a way of increasing my aggression, specifically for competitions and to a lesser degree for training. And I think Tren would add that little bit of an aspect for me. And we'll deal with the specifics of side effects, but I would probably want to keep the dose low just to mitigate the out of gym edginess and aggression. But again, Debo and Annabelle and Tren together, I think that's that yin and yang stuff that we've touched on in the past. The synergy of the good feel good factor that you sometimes get with Debo and the slightly edgy, slightly anxious feeling that some users have on Tren, which is actually what you want for the gym to get in there, to kill the weights, to have those kind of crazy sessions, and just being super careful with mitigating almost the sort of sensation of being low blood sugar because of that compartmentalization, because of the way that Tren kind of forces glycogen into the muscle, and so you haven't got it float around in the body for energy. But that's what listen, bodybuilders, that's what you're after. I'm looking more from a strength athlete specific point of view, because mostly what I train for is to get stronger or to be strong. I'm not necessarily looking for a particular look. So my experience differs in that regard, where Steve's talking about from a look, from an aesthetic, and how that is perceived. But hey, I could always do with being a few pounds leaner, Steve, and looking better. There's no argument there. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A lot of that depends on where you're coming from. Like, a lot of people, you're a younger guy, maybe you're skinnier, you want to bulk. You've been skinny all your life. You want to try bulking. A lot of guys, you've been doing this for 10 years and you're like, shit, I want to put on some bulk. I want to put on some strength. So it really depends on where you're coming from for sure. So what other orals, Mobster, do we want to do you recommend?
Okay, guys, one of the things I always say, we get this. Let me redress this. What happens sometimes on the forums, guys, is you come online and you say, I've got this list of drugs I wanted to try, and you won't say what the aim of the cycle is. And I will berate you for that. So here's what I would do. If you were a client working with me or working with Steve, he would say, what is your aim? What are you looking for? Now, as I said earlier on, Debo for me, £10 gain. Especially back in the day when I first started, keeping £6 of those £10. I knew what it was. I knew how it felt. I knew what it was like, etc., etc. Anavar, same again. I know 100% that I'm going to get stronger on Anavar. That might be another 5 or 10% at the top end of my training cycle, not my steroid cycle. So I need to have this weight lifted, and I know that if I use Anavar, I'm going to be that much closer as long as I put the work in. So you come to me and you say, "This is how I look. Are you heavy? Are you a few percentage body fat more than you should be?" Then Anavar, Winstrol would be my choices. Provira might be a choice. Superdrol might be somewhere in there, but I would put it somewhere in the middle. Whereas, for example, Debo and Anadrol, I would recommend more to the leaner guys who want to bulk. Now, you can say to me, I want to stay lean. Fine. Then we use the dry weight. If you're a little bit overweight, I don't want you getting too wet. I don't want you gaining too much mass because you're already overweight. And there's no point, as Steve said, sometimes with this stuff, this idea that if you're a big fat guy and you're on a perma bulk, like Steve says, and then you use Debo and you get even bulkier, that's actually it kind of defeats the purpose. What's the point of getting more watery, more fat looking, more chubby looking? Yes, you might be fantastically strong in the gym, but now it's just like an ugly mass. So it's very specific, Steve, to the person's requirement, to the look that they have. And again, even you and I have done this when we talked about these kind of things, their body type, ectomorphic, endomorphic, mesomorphic. Mesomorphic's the muscular. And the muscular is probably going to do quite well regardless of what you give them because they tend to have that genetic advantage. But the ectomorph could always do with bulking up, Steve. And the endo could always do with dropping a few fats. So it's that kind of thing. Do I want a big fat guy to use a wet drug like Dianabol at a higher dose? No, and I don't care what the source is. I don't want him adding another £10, pushing his blood pressure through the roof. So we look at these things with that kind of eye. as an example, and I said earlier on, I've tried halo testing and I wasn't looking to gain muscular weight. I wasn't using it with Tren. I just wanted to see a halo was going to give me, I only run it for a few weeks, that extra aggression in the gym. And the short and simple answer was that it didn't work for me in that particular regards. I think that's because I'm kind of at the top end of where I would be in terms of my strength at the age I am now. And I don't think necessarily it would have added too much to my edge back in the day when I was super competitive, because I was already in that place physically and mentally. But you guys, again, who're starting out, who might not have my aims that I was looking for at those times or now, you may well feel the difference. And again, what's the difference again, Steve, between guys that have a low affinity for testosterone in all its forms versus those with a high affinity? What do I mean by that, guys? So we have people with low testosterone levels that feel great, and other guys with low testosterone levels that feel goddamn awful. And then when you up the testosterone levels, they feel better. And part of that better is literally feeling more aggressive, more manly, and so on and so forth. So that's why these drugs work in a different particular way. So for me, recommendations are, and it's literally based on my personal use of Euro Pharmacies products. Dianabol would be number one in terms of bulking. Number two would be Anadrol, or that could easily be number one for many of you listeners. And number three would be Anavar. And only because I have 100% personal experience results, I know what those results are. And so again, if you came to me as a client or as a listener and you said, what, those would be my choices of recommendation. In terms of the rest, I would look at your body type, what your requirements are, whether you just want lean muscle tissue versus a less lean muscle tissue gain, more of a dirty bulk, if you will, and also things like your health right now, your blood pressure right now, and so on and so forth. That's how we do it. That's how we would work with clients. That's how we give out the advice. It would be too easy to say, oh, take this, this, and this, and that's what's going to happen. And we see that sometimes on the forum, Steve, but that's not how you and I work. It's not how you and I think, and it's not what we would be like with clients. And we'd like to give some of that kind of advice to you, our listeners, in the same particular way. Look at what your body type is, look how lean you are, look what your health is like, and look what you really want. Do you really want to gain 20 pounds when 10 pounds would be a lot better? And if you gain 10 pounds, would 6 pounds look amazing? Yes, it would. As an example, Steve, and I can think back of the historical Iron Game books I've got here, on an average height Joe, and we're talking about 50s and 60s, 10 pounds was the equivalent of 1 inch all over. That's an inch on your arms, an inch on your chest, an inch on your back, an inch on your thighs, an inch on your everywhere, guys, on your neck, everywhere. And an inch is a lot. 10 pounds is a lot. So again, it's stuff like that. That's why we don't go crazy with the dosages. And that's why we recommend these products that we know have worked. Like Steve said, he's run specific cycles, and I've run specific cycles using Euro Pharmacies products. I know how I respond. But equally, that I know what my aims are versus your aims. So your aims, the recommendations, the choices should be specific to you. But we can generalize and say Debo works for a huge, and that most people do. And Anadrol works for most people. Sometimes Anadrol is almost mythical in the amount of gains, especially if you're new to cycling and performance enhancing drugs. Tren is the same. It's borderline mythical with some guys, and that we're looking for that combination. I'd love to be able to answer the question with I've used Tren and X or Y. I really wish I could, just for this podcast, because then I could say 100% this is how I responded, and my best guess would be that you'll respond the same. I think Tren with, for example, Anavar would actually probably be my specific personal choice because of the lean muscular gains that both of those are going to give me. But if I want to feel good, it would probably be Debo. So it's what do you want? And sometimes, guys, we need to ask you these additional questions to get that extra bit of information, Steve. As I'm sure you understand when you're working with clients, it doesn't always come across on the forums, and it's difficult to say that when we've got thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of listeners, what each listener wants, what each member on the forum wants. I would want to know that, then I make my recommendations, because that's how it should be. Not every person's underweight, not every person's overweight. It should come down to your individual needs and requirements. I'm a big guy, like Steve, mostly muscle, not all muscle, but mostly muscle. And you can see that in the occasional photograph that comes up online, where the weight's been added slowly over time. But you might be a young guy just starting out and you want 20 pounds. And if you want 20 pounds, Tren and Anadrol. See what I mean, Steve? So if I would, you can't have that sweet shop approach. You've got to have the specific, and you kind of almost got to be clinical in your approach to it. sometimes that's why you work with someone else or you get advice, because it's difficult sometimes to judge for yourself. That's sometimes, guys, why we ask for pictures. Be specific as to what you look like, what your body fat is, what your requirements are, the reason why you want to gain, and then boom, we're coming with advice straight away. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Back to you, Steve.
So let's go over a little bit of side effects now, how to combat them. So the number one way to combat side effects are going to be, number one, cycle length. The longer you run Tren, the more side effects start to domino. And that's just the way it is. I mean, the longer, obviously, it's in your system, the more side effects you're going to get. That's just common sense, right? Also, the dosages. How much are you dosing these products? So Euro Pharmacies, they have really good options when it comes to buying these orals. You can always cut up the tablets with a pill cutter. Really, really easy to do. So in a normal situation with Dianabol, for example, you'd run 50 milligrams a day, maybe at the max, 30 to 50 milligrams solo, right? So in this stack, cut it in half, 10 to 30 milligrams with the Tren. Now you're cutting down your side effects, right? Same thing with the with Superdrol. If you want to use Superdrol with Tren, usually guys run 25, 30 milligrams of Superdrol. Well, with Tren, you want to cut that in half. You want to go maybe 10, 15 milligrams of Superdrol. Same thing with the Anadrol. Usually guys want 50 milligrams of the Anadrol. Well, in this one, get a pill cutter. Cut that 50 milligram tablet in half. And you can run Anadrol 25 milligrams with this stack. So that's the number one way you can cut down on side effects when it comes to this cycle. Now, you want to be careful with the Dianabol. It doesn't aromatize into estrogen. If you're prone to estrogen, you want to possibly use a little bit of aromasin with it, okay? And that will help cut down on the estrogenic side effects. Now, when it comes to, in general, I talked about earlier, the Trenbolone side effects, the synergy with something like Anadrol, which is also a very, very strong steroid, or Superdrol. You're going to need to balance your carbs throughout the day. So I want you to basically focus on good complex carbs throughout the day. And you can always, do something like make homemade pancakes. Okay. Homemade pancakes with all natural ingredients. All right. Add some raw honey or raw maple syrup to it. That'd be a great meal to eat after your workout later in the day, or even after your workout early in the day. This way it gets in a lot of carbs in your system, but natural carbs. You want to stick to natural on this. A lot of berries, blueberries, blackberries, strawberries, organic. Make sure you get organic because these, they spray the crap out of these fruits, okay? These farmers, they spray the crap out of it. So you want to make sure you get organic so you're not putting pesticides in your system. Berries are your friend. Tropical fruits, mangoes, all these tropical fruits that are out there. I love them. I always go to the tropical fruit section and I pick out some different tropical fruits. Pineapple, great, great option. And then the melon family, the watermelon, the cantaloupe, those are great for hydration. So you want to be pounding those throughout the day, especially like if you want to eat something before a workout. Fruit's the best thing, like a cantaloupe with a couple eggs, great before a workout. Because if you work out on this cycle and you're deep into the cycle, you may start getting dizzy during your cycle. You may start feeling fatigued during your cycle. And that's because that nutrition partitioning effect. So these are ways to lower side effects. Night sweats. A lot of people complain about night sweats on Tren. Get a fan. Get a dual current fan off of Amazon. They're not expensive. They don't make a lot of noise. They're quiet. Okay, a dual current fan, a DC fan, does not make noise from the motor. You'll hear it spinning. You'll hear the wind coming from it, but you won't actually hear the annoying motor sound. That's a great option. Get a thinner blanket, and then make sure you're spreading out your carbs, especially at your last meal of the day. It needs to have some fruit, needs to have some good complex carb, maybe a sweet potato. That's gonna help you during the night avoid the night sweats, because now your body isn't going to be like going through like an experience of, oh my God, low blood sugar, because of that Tren basically annihilating doing that in nutrition partitioning. And really your muscles are going to be begging for food. It's going to be begging for food. It wants to grow. Your body wants to grow. So yeah. So Mobster, why don't you give us some tips on side effects?
Okay, number one, guys, I would definitely look at an AI for this cycle, like Steve's already suggested, with an aromasin. Number 2, don't be fat. And I mean that quite brutally, not mucking around, guys. Don't be fat. In fact, the leaner your body weight is here with some body fats, a little bit, the leaner you are, the better. If you are fat and you get fatter, you're just going to have more side effects. It's as simple as that. It really is, especially when you're using Tren with another bulk and oral from Euro Pharmacies. That's dosages. It's too easy. It really is too easy, especially when we're all kind of, hidden away in our man caves, typing on the internet to suggest higher dosages, because it's almost kind of fun. It's almost kind of a sport. But I would always keep the dosages sensible. The higher the dosages, the greater the side effects. It's really not that complicated. And something we discussed in a previous podcast, Steve, is the difference between a clean diet and a dirty diet, so-called dirty bulk. Dirty bulk is an excuse like we need one already to eat donuts and ice cream and other crap and takeouts and anything fried this, fried that, fried chocolate, you name it, fried Mars bars, the lot. I mean, I'm dirty bulking. I can eat what the fuck I like. Yeah, sure. Do what you want to do, but don't come bitching to me that you struggled with this cycle. You know what I mean, guys? So it's stuff like that. Hydrating is actually perversely going to help you with the sweats, because I'd rather sweat the stuff out, but it's just a pain in the ass at night time, Steve, with the night sweats. So like Steve said, if you know that Tren's going to give you the night sweats, and especially if you've got the higher body fat like I just talked about, then you're going to get the night sweats, and you're going to struggle at night time, whether that's having to take a t-shirt off in the middle of the night and change to a clean one, or change even as bad as changing the sheets on your bed because you're sweating so much. So whether that's having a cold, something icy cold by the bedside, or whether it's having a fan there to help reduce that body temperature. Maybe it's switching off the central heating, guys, kind of sensible. Sometimes you forget, and flicking off the duvet and just having a sheet to cover your body when you're on Tren, and especially when you're on a Tren bulking cycle. So some of this is kind of common sense. One of the things Steve talked about earlier on in terms of food and the snacks and the idea of things that you can take that help you, didn't mention, but I would say homemade flapjack, Steve, with real honey, especially the stuff, the raw honey, if you can get hold of it. Homemade with oatmeal, and Steve's already talked about, chop some of those fruits up that he's already talked about there, dry what you can get them dry, and mix them in and have that combination. For me, Steve, I actually used to do this. I would actually, if I was working at what we call a late shift, which was I think 11 till 6, something like that, my last tea break would be around 4 o'clock, and I'd have a big 100-gram, which is about let me think now, 3.5 ounce bar, flapjack bar, and then I'd get 2. I would eat one then, and I would have another one in my pocket. And as I was walking back the book off for around 6 o'clock, 6:30, getting ready to hit the gym just after 7, I'd start eating that second flapjack. And the last thing I'd do would be have a little cup of black coffee, go on the train, go home, and as the gym was right next to the railway station, and I was ready to rock and roll. I've got 350 grams of carbs in my system, calories in my system, which is enough for a workout, even at the end of a working day. I've got a little bit more from the coffee. I'm ready to rock and roll, and I can go in and kill it after an 8 or 9 hour shift and still hit the gym and then go straight home and put on some real food. So there's stuff like that. So yeah, honestly, I'll reiterate, guys, hydrate, use an AI at the right dosages, just so that you don't get estrogenic issues. The lower the body fat you start with, the better. And I mean that in the nicest possible way, just for the side effects. Less than 15% is an absolute minimum, and somewhere around 10% would be ideal, where you can just about see your abs because you've got a little bit of give there. But if you're already overweight, if you're already holding a little bit of extra body fat, you might, especially on a bulk, add more to it, and that's just going to make it worse. Dosage is nice and low again, and like I said, a cleaner diet is better than a dirty diet. It's tempting to do a dirty bulk, guys. If you come to me and you're under 10%, you're 6 foot tall and you weigh 150 pounds, go for it. But most of you should be somewhere in the between, a little bit under 6 foot tall, should be around 160 pounds when we're starting to talk about it, and you should just maybe have those abs visible. And then we can get into the kind of tweaking the stuff like I've talked about just a few minutes ago. So yeah, those are my suggestions for mitigating the side effects. Back to you, Steve.
So let's go over some why Euro Pharmacies. Talk about Euro Pharmacies a lot on this one, and look, at the end of the day, I'm going to take Trenbolone as an specifically. We've seen a lot of sources. They brew Trenbolone. A lot of guys, in the gym, they'll brew Trenbolone in some trailer in the middle of the sticks, and right next to the Tren that they're brewing, they're making meth, and they're making all these recreational drugs, pain pills or whatever. That's flooding the America and Europe and all these countries, right? And these people, those are the people that are making your steroid. Those are the steroids you're putting in your system when you buy from some random dude in the gym, or you buy off a buddy or something. Okay, the Tren is going to be dirty. It's going to be full of chemicals and metals. It's not going to be pure. It's going to be like 30% Tren and 70% something else. Look, Euro Pharmacies, it's legit. I mean, this is gear that is made in an actual lab by scientists, by doctors, by chemists. These people know what they're doing. They're professionals. Okay, this is what they do for a living, and it's legal in their country, right? So they're able to do it. It's regulated. All right. So they make sure that the gear they put out is legitimate. They test it. There's no inconsistencies to the batches. The dude in the trailer brewing the Tren, you could have one Tren that's 30%, one that's 40%, one that's 10%. Who the hell knows? You don't know. He doesn't test the gear. He doesn't care if he puts out bad products. He just wants to make money. He's trying to make money here. It's something where, for him to go and test his products, it's going to cost them more than it would be to acquire the gear in the first place. So obviously he wants to he doesn't care about his customers, So he knows that even if he puts out low quality gear, that you're not going to be able to tell the difference. So, it's amazing. We see a lot of guys on the forums, they come on there, they start using a legitimate brand like Euro Pharmacies, and then they'll be like, wow, my cycles are so much better than they were before. And I'm like, yeah, of course it is, because now you're using legit gear. This is legit, properly dosed gear versus the underdosed, low quality gear that you were using before. It makes a difference. So it's always important to pick legitimate now. Now, don't get me started on orals. When it comes to orals, oh my God, if you knew what they were filling these orals with. This dude out of the trailer, he's filling the orals with all kinds of crap, chemicals and sugars and all kinds of fillers in there. He's trying to save money. That Anavar isn't real Anavar. 100% it's fake. So Euro Pharmacies, their orals are on point. That's my favorite of all, is their orals. I love their orals, professionally packaged, legitimate, and it's properly dosed. You're getting 50 milligrams of Anavar in a pill. It's 50 milligrams of Anavar. You're not getting ripped off when you use Euro Pharmacies. It's completely legitimate. What are your thoughts on?
I'll tell you what I've done before, Steve. Number one, how long has the company been around? How long have they been in the industry? Because here's how this stuff works, guys. I'm long enough in the game to see labs come and go. A local lab that came and went inside of a year. And back in the day, that wasn't uncommon, guys. You'd have people absolutely raving about something, and then it disappeared 1, 2, 3 years. Whether they got busted or they just made their money, they went on to other things, whatever, or they wasn't making money for that and they went on to selling other drugs. Exactly like Steve said with that meth lab analogy, because pain pills and meth and coke, all that kind of stuff makes a lot more money than does selling anabolic steroids. So how long has a company been around? That's number one. Number two, recommendations. Have I used the product? Yes. So therefore I say I've used the product. These are the results I have. Therefore I know that the results are given what they should be. And how did that happen? If I used the product, if I was using something that didn't contain an active ingredient, why did I get a response? It can't all be the placebo. I don't gain £6 placebo. I don't gain £10 placebo. I don't get stronger than dream on a placebo. So this example, just pure experience. And you get that, but you say, right, have you used EP? Did you get good results on EP? Yes. Personally, yes. And we can speak for other people on the forums when we say that. So that's another one. Stuff like certificates of analysis. The better companies will get their product tested. They get their raws for the most part, but not always, from the same place as everybody else. Sometimes it's from Russia, sometimes it's Eastern Europe, sometimes it's China. So they get that product tested when it arrives before they turn it into a pill or an injectable, 100%. And then they do the same again. They get their products made, for example, an injectable. There it is in a 10 ml vial, and they literally pick at random a vial from a great stack. Let's say they make 300, pick number 900, 300, 299. Let's grab that one. Let's grab that one, and they send them off. They are spending decent money, guys, $1,000 sometimes to have these products tested. And here's the thing with EP: EP doesn't claim that every single batch, every single tested product is 100% on point. In fact, they specifically quite often have said it's less, it's 90, it's 92, it's 96, it's 97. They expect to see a deviation just because of the tiny little differences between one batch and the next. And they're being honest in that particular regards. There's a bunch of other stuff here, guys. So, for example, I'll give you an example of talking about what Steve mentioned earlier on in manufacturing. We had a documentary here in the UK, Steve, some years ago, and some of our UK listeners might remember this particular one. I think it was one of those expose type documentaries, and they went to a warehouse in Wembley, and they were making pills. I don't think it was steroids. I think they were ecstasy, but they were making pills in a cement mixer, Steve. So the stuff was going in pill form, and then they was throwing colouring in, and the colouring was going on to the pills there, and they would come out the right colour. That's how they were. This is how there was no cleanliness whatsoever. You can find videos online, guys. I think Steve mentioned it. It's on another podcast of guys that were making stuff in their kitchen. Lovely, lots of layers of polythene everywhere on the windows, the floor, the door, everywhere. But it's being made in their kitchen or their garage. We had another documentary, Steve, where they're in a garage in a lockup. The fella, well-known Dave Crossland, I shall name him, sitting there in an armchair, and a balaclavaed would-be gangster, steroid dealer, whatever you want to do, comes in there and mixes up, I believe it was sustanon, might have been cypionate powder, into an alcohol, stirs it, and dings it in the microwave, and then says, right, there you go, that's 200. That's how they were making it. It wasn't, they didn't filter on camera. There was nothing like that going on. Again, you don't get to be a player in the industry for the length of time that Euro Pharmacies has been around if you're banging it out in a fucking microwave in a lock-up garage. You really aren't. So there's stuff like that. Another one I would talk about as well, Steve, funny enough, EP has really, really, really good customer service. It's probably right up there with one other company that we address. Both of them have great customer service. And EP, I specifically have dealt with their customer service myself and with their company reps, and they are awesome in that particular regards. If you don't get an answer over the weekend, you'll get an answer first thing Monday morning. And 9 times out of 10, I've had answers over the weekend too. So their customer service is on point. Their packaging is on point, to the point where I've actually taken photographs for them of their packaging because they want to make sure that those items are being sent out. Please let us know how it arrived, this kind of thing. So I have not had one of their packages not make it to my door. Not one. Touch wood, never again, but never had that happen, never had any issues with it. And in fact, in my personal experience, I've never even had them to resend out an order. So for me, 100% on point, properly packed, properly dosed, recommended, used myself, and highly regarded within the industry. And that's exactly how it should have. One of the things I will say, guys, is you shouldn't take our words for it. Go and check. Go on other forums, especially our forums, but go on other forums. Look on their own website. Click on Euro Pharmacies website. Check out what to look at. There will be on their website links you can click to download to see the certificates of analysis for yourself. Check the dates on those certificates of analysis. Is it a recent date? Was it what? Can you find the name of the lab that they used? All of these kind of things, and then you can say this is what's happened. And I know because we had it here in the UK, and I think we've had it there, over there in the US as well, Steve, where certain forums have collectively gone and had items tested for them. What do I mean by that? So you get 100 members, they all throw $10 in, and now you've got $10,000, and you can go off and it was $1,000, and you can go off and get items tested, and that's happened a few times, and that's how they've recommended certain companies over other companies. Like Steve said, where God knows what the bulking agent was, God knows what the filler was, this kind of thing, because all tablets will have fillers. 100 milligrams, 50 milligrams is a fractional amount of a pill, but the filler should be clean. The product should be clean. It shouldn't have to be full of heavy metals, this kind of stuff. And again, you do not get to stay around as long as Euro Pharmacies if you're not producing products of that level of quality over this length of time. I'm talking about decades now, Steve. I'm pretty sure off the top of my head, and don't quote me on this, guys, but 20 to 30 years. Certainly my personal experience is coming up 7 or 8 years. And using their products for probably about the same amount of time, Steve. And that's my personal experience, 100%. So one of those things that Mobster can say, I've used it, this is the response I've had, I would recommend it to anyone. Back to you.
All right, buddy. Great show, guys. Come on the forums. We'd love to hear from you. And, we're going to keep these podcasts going. We have a lot of good feedback so far. So we love all of you out there. Mobster, great show. Take us in the disclaimer.
Please note, we're not doctors, and the opinions on these shows are ours and ours alone. It's our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.